We got stable coins on Lightning Network, guys. Stable coins on Lightning Network. Tether is now live on Bitcoin's Lightning Network via Taproot Assets. So we got these, I don't know. Apparently Tether has like 350 million users, or a lot of people use Tether. I don't use Tether. I don't know why it's so popular, but now Tether's on Bitcoin, powered by Taproot Assets protocol.
So this is something that had been announced, a year and a half ago, maybe. I remember that there was a conference. Elizabeth Stark, who's the CEO of Lightning Labs, and Paolo Arduino Tether were on stage, and they announced that this was going to happen at some point. And I honestly got all excited about the idea. And why? So, like, if you look at Tether and USDT, and you go do some digging, you'll realize it's on like 12 different chains. It's like, it's one thing. It's really one thing controlled by one company, but it's distributed across maybe it's not 12, but it's more than 6. It's probably like 8 or 10. And, Solana, Tron, Ethereum itself, Arbitrum, there's more. All
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Well, now Bitcoin, but it's like, all these different chains had allocations, issuance on their chain of Tether. So when you were kind of working with Tether, whether you want a wallet or something, you were dealing with it on one of these chains. Mm-hmm. Now, all of these chains are all based on Ethereum. They're all kind of, children of Ethereum. And when you study the consensus mechanism for Ethereum, how it's proof of stake versus proof of work on Bitcoin, and when you study like how these sorts of chains and coins come into existence, you find out, often most people don't know that there's a huge pre-mine, what they call, right? Where whoever kind of got things rolling, whether they were the developers or the early investors or whatever. And back in the day, there was kind of a whole fad in the last cycle, so 4 or 5 years ago, right, where there was these initial coin offerings, which was kind of everybody was trying to jump on the bandwagon. A lot of people got wrecked with losing money investing in these things, and so there's a lot of chicanery that goes on these derivative chains. Now, I'm not going to say that there's not use cases where these things can be valuable, and when you start talking about, people make the argument like, well, Bitcoin's too slow, you can't get enough transactions, it will never support the world, but we have these other things. That may be true, and there's definitely more programmability. And when I first got started, I kind of gravitated there because I'm a developer at heart, and I wanted to sort of play around and make stuff on top.
Yeah, makes sense.
And at the time, Bitcoin just was very rudimentary. You couldn't really do a whole lot other than move money around, so it wasn't all that compelling. And then but on the Ethereum side, this got to be kind of where all the action was, especially with stable coins. Now, the proof of stake, and the fact that how do you really trust that there's a group of people that either had an initial sort of allocation, so you're now fighting and having to pay real money for what's left. Right. Some of these things create more coins as they go. Some of them destroy coins. It all depends on the protocol. Most people don't study it that deep. But the fact that, it's not the security of the underlying chains themselves have always been kind of questionable. And I mean, if you go back to the last administration, Gary Gensler, there was a lot of ambiguity in whether or not these things are going to survive. Gensler was really bringing a lot of, legal action regulatory action against these different projects. So, and these projects had founders, investors, a home office or an address. I mean, you could go and literally, bust down a door to affect what's going on with that project, right? Yeah. So the fact that they have a physical manifestation in the world that kind of regulates in the core, Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin is like seen as the guy that makes the decisions around what happens. And, Ethereum went from proof of work to switch to proof of stake. They decided to change, in midstream, how they did their consensus. And there's various other core structural changes that they've made. So it's like, as an Ethereum holder, you're like, well, do I have a vote in that? Well, technically, but how do you really know that your voice got heard? Yeah. So, I mean, that's that world versus the Bitcoin world. No issuer, completely bound by energy and compute to make blocks, a protocol that is embedded in the code, a hard cap on the number of coins that will ever come into existence. It's just like night and day. And, from a regulatory perspective, the CFTC and had, even back in the Biden administration, had said Bitcoin is a commodity. Everything else is security. Now that's kind of shifted with the newer legislation, but it's pretty well established now. They're not going to turn around and say, oh, Bitcoin's a security today. It's not going to happen because so much has been built now behind that ruling that it's a commodity. And a commodity like grain or oil, who's the issuer? Mother Earth, right?
Earth, yeah.
Maybe. So it's like there's no company, there's no entity that can be like, hauled into court and thrown into prison kind of thing if whoever the powers that be don't like them. So that's always been a good security. Now, that being said, like I was mentioning, I first kind of got my feet wet with all this stuff and blockchain and trying to help enterprises like integrate with this stuff. It was like, that's where all the action was. And Bitcoin was like a real laggard in terms of like a platform for developing more higher order types of applications and scenarios. But once I kind of came to understand that the consensus protocol is really what matters, and the way blocks are mined and brought in are really important, and that's the better way to go. It's like, look, I'm going to spend more time building on Bitcoin, understanding Bitcoin, and it will get there, and it has. And this is like another step in it getting maturing to a point where it's getting useful. So the Taproot asset, and actually I had been working on a project on my own to like bring up multiple Lightning nodes that had the Taproot asset capability turned on. So because when you're transferring Bitcoin, you can bring up one Lightning node, great, you can fund it and find somebody else with another node to say, okay, let's open a channel. But when you're talking about Taproot assets over Lightning, that other side has to be also software-wise configured to manage it and understand it. And while it's using the Lightning network, it is actually, it converts from the asset from one side of the asset channel. So you have to declare a channel to be a particular asset type. Then it can move the asset across the channel. But one of the nice things is it can leverage the rest of the Lightning network to get to the other side of the network. And then you need to find someone that has a node set up to do the reverse, convert it from sats back into the asset type, USDT in this case, and then potentially move it again to the other side of the channel where somebody can, like the recipient is waiting for that USDT. So it goes from USDT to sats to USDT again. So, and that's the beauty, because all the intermediate nodes don't care. It's just another sat movement. So, but in order to really do it, you need at least 4 nodes set up that understand how to handle that asset type. And also, there's another type of node. Somebody has to play the role of keeping track of who owns what amount of that asset. It's not a completely bare instrument. And this is, I think, an important distinction. It's not, there is still what they call a universe server that keeps track of who has gotten what amount of Tether over Taproot. and that becomes a point of control. So the regulatory industry could come in to say, Tether themselves, if they're running some of these nodes, and say, hey, we flagged this wallet address as a bad actor. We see that there's been some Tether transferred, even if it's over Bitcoin, and we need you to freeze or seize that asset. And if you look at Tether's news site, you'll see incidents where they've worked with various regulatory governments to effectively seize and retain assets or hold assets. So
it's garbage.
Well, just be very clear what you're dealing with by allowing the transport layer, Lightning, to be, which we very much like, which is based on Bitcoin. That's I think a great thing, and will help, I think, encourage use of Lightning as well. It's another sort of way to use it, but the asset itself is still burdened by these same qualities.
Yeah.
It's underpinned by U.S. Treasury, so the value of the dollar directly it's a stable coin. That's why they call it stable. It's 1-to-1 with a Treasury,
which is ironic, though, right?
Yeah,
stably declining.
It's going to buy less and less, as the dollar weakens, so this is not saving you from that. No. However, I think a lot of folks just haven't been going through the motions of doing things like this. And if this kind of gives them an initial comfort level, like, oh, it's like dollars. It's just like Cash App. It's like, I can just open it up and pay somebody with dollars. I get paid in dollars. I see some dollars in here. I move some dollars. I go to the stores. I see the price tag in dollars. It's all very familiar. So I think it's a good incremental step. And just for the record, there's been a couple other announcements in the last year or so with Tether to use other mechanisms of transporting. One's called RGB, and another one's called ARC, and there's another one called Spark. So Tether is got its fingers in a lot of different mechanisms, and which to me is great. This means that this stuff's not going to fade away, so yeah, I think it's an encouraging thing, but just to warn folks, it's that Tether over Lightning isn't any different, any safe, any less like a dollar than a dollar is. So
yeah, the problem is Tether, right? Who are they? These are people that create this product, Tether, for free. They say that they have a 1-to-1 backing with a treasury, a dollar, this, that, the other thing. Okay, how can you prove it? It's not on a blockchain. It's not on Bitcoin.